Good evening, livelings, and welcome to August 16th, 2011. Today is the day that I take Terry to the emergency room. I got home after working. I had started working at a real estate office part-time, and I gave him his day as requested. And I came home and he was sitting on the couch, and I could tell that he hadn't moved all day. And I asked him, did you get everything done that you wanted to get done today on your computer? And he said, I didn't have the energy. I never made it to my computer. And I said, okay, well then it's time to go. So I got him loaded up into the car and I took him to the emergency room. Now I want to back up just a little bit of history. I met him when he was 54 years old. I was 41. We were 13 years apart. And we had a discussion early on when we were dating. And I don't know how it came up, but it was a discussion about going to the doctor and getting checkups and that sort of thing. And he, in a boastful way, I guess, said, well, I haven't been to a doctor in years. And I looked at him and I said, well, at the age that you're at in your 50s, that's not a good idea. You should at least go get your annual checkups and do all the things you're supposed to do when you turn 50. And he kind of blew that off. And yeah. And for the next 10 years, every time I came back from the gynecologist, getting my yearly pap smears and my yearly checkups and my yearly everything else that women have to do, I would walk in and say, is this the year you're going to get all your checkups? And he'd say, yeah, I'll get around to it. And another year would go by and he never got around to it. And I give that little piece of history because it's going to be important in the rest of this story today. So we get to the hospital and they can tell that he's not well. His color was, again, that ashen gray. He just looked horrible. He looked like a walking corpse. So they got him in there. And the first thing they did was take a chest x-ray because they thought it was his heart. And he wasn't getting enough oxygen, and that's why he was a funny color. And while we were in the room together, he looked over at me and he said, no matter what happens, don't say I told you so. I said, of course I wouldn't do that. But that's why the history that I just told you is important. And I said, honey, of course I won't tell you I told you so. And in that moment, I knew that he thought he was pretty sick. So the chest x-ray came back and the doctor came in. It was a woman. And she said, have you ever had any problems with your lungs? And he said, no, I've been a jock and an athlete all my life, and I've never had any problems with my lungs. And she said, well, the reason I ask is because you have lesions in your lungs, all over your lungs, what look like lesions. We can't tell a whole lot from an x-ray. And he said, no, I've never had any lung disease or anything like that. And they did blood work. And we were there a few hours. And then another doctor came in a few hours later and said, we believe that you have cancer somewhere in your body and that it has metastasized to your lungs, and you need to see an oncologist right away. In fact, we've made an appointment for you to see one in the morning. They said it's not lung cancer, even though there's cancer in your lungs. We suspect it's colon cancer because that's where it metastasizes to. When you have colon cancer. And he said, okay. And I went out into the hallway and I lost my shit. Sorry, but and I couldn't breathe. And I was walking around the halls and I couldn't cry. So shocked. And I pulled myself together and I walked back in, and he was just laying there. I think he was in shock too. And I went over and hugged him. And he was very stoic. And he said, it's all right. He didn't say much. So we got ourselves together and we went home. And that was August 16th, 2011. And tomorrow, we go to the oncologist. And I'll tell you the rest of the story. Good night.